Welcome to Strength in the Numbers. My name is Andrew Codd, accountant, author, and commercial finance entrepreneur, and it's my job each week to bring you leaders in finance and business and deconstruct with them their real stories, insights, and hard-won lessons into practical advice on the key strengths and qualities you need to remain relevant in accounting and finance today, as well as the steps you can begin to take to elevate the impact you make to have a fun, successful, and rewarding career in accounting and finance. Now let's go over to the show.
Actually, the CFO has to be ferociously neutral and ferociously independent. And that is a difficult thing, especially if as a person, and if you don't know this, if you know this, then you can act with a knowing it. But if as a person, you need to be close to somebody, if you need to be loved, and if you need to be included, and you don't know that, then actually you probably will get hurt in this situation because you are too close to either side. Yeah, and as everything is about creating trust in this situation, creating trust with a CEO that you're not Big Brother, and creating trust with a fund that you are transparent. The only way of doing this is to be neutral. And in order to be neutral, you need to understand who you are and what your natural tendency is so that you can put this aside.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Strength in the Numbers. Now, really excited to bring you a special guest today, Susanne Liepmann, whom you just heard from. And the reason why I'm so excited to bring you Susanne is she's had an amazing career spanning international corporate finance, leveraged buyouts, C-level positions, controllership, FP&A director. There's so many roles in the field of finance, plus dealing with many different cultures whilst on her career journey. And also Susanne went back to school to study a very interesting area of human behaviour and how that can be applied to finance in the LBO environment. So just so much to go share with our audience today. Now, some of the things we deconstruct together on the show are how an LBO environment might be different to your corporate finance team environment within organisations. Also, some of the things you can do to play that balancing act and why it's important to sometimes go to the balcony. I also like how Susanne calls out the importance of being neutral and independent as a CFO and why that's important to build trust. And it takes a certain type of person as well, and we can deconstruct the more ideal types to be a CFO. And I think that also helps them becoming a CEO. And very important for today's current times is to be able to remove anxiety from the business. So knowing our whys so we can do the right thing, providing the valuable information on what that looks like to the business, and that important to building trust with business partners. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, please remember to share it with others. They can subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube and Spotify. And we really appreciate you listening in today. That's enough for me. So over to Susanne and the show. Susanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Andy, for having me. I'm very honored to be invited.
Yeah, well, look, I'm really delighted that you made it, Susanne, despite all the craziness going around us at the moment and the times we're living through. But, it's great to be able to have another conversation again, albeit over the podcast as opposed to in person. But for some of our audience who are maybe less familiar with your background, would you mind maybe taking us briefly through your journey in finance?
Sure. I don't look like this, but I'm a dinosaur. My ADN is French actually. My DNA is business finance with a huge passion for transformation of finance through finance. I am CFO who works now in leveraged buyout settings. So that means that a fund owns the company I'm working in. And I've always been a seasoned networker. I think creating links is probably what describes me best. That I love this. I create links between people who play in the same P&L, amongst finance people, and also amongst cultures. I'm German. I've lived in France for the past 30 years, and I've worked mostly in international and Anglo-Saxon contexts. So to do it more CV-like, I did international business studies in France. That's how I got here in the first place. Then I started off in audit with Arthur Andersen. At the time, that was beginning of the 90s when audit was huge fund. I quickly went to a team that did a lot of French-German cross-border acquisitions. That was the time when the big German conglomerates like AEG, Telefunken, or Hagenuk were dismantled. And we had a lot of French tech companies who bought pieces of that. So that was, at the time, you didn't have virtual data rooms. You got into the companies. You could do midnight audits. You went to see the smell of the place, talk to people, and lots of funny stories to tell. So that was really, really great. And it was kind of my MBA then, and a great company. And I left actually way before the Enron scandal, but it still hit a lot when it happened. And I went to an American company where I stayed over 17 years. And I did a lot of, anything you could do in finance. I started off in mergers and acquisitions finance. Then I went to field finance as a business unit controller. I then was a corporate controller for France, went back to international. Actually, they were in the same building, which was neat. You only had to change floors. And in international, I was head of European finance planning and analysis. That was a great time, actually, small team. And we were really working on enabling the subsidiaries to, first of all, do their reporting, but also to see their figures in a way they were seen in the reporting. Because when I started, actually, they had their own systems and corporate had theirs, and those didn't talk. And I said, well, how can somebody explain the figures if he or she doesn't see them the same way than corporate? So we worked a lot of that. And for me, really, finance is a language that makes people talk about business. And that was really a very fun period. And then I took on the position of CFO. That's when I became a CFO for the French and Tunisian subsidiaries of this group. Yeah, and after 17 years, it was kind of coming to a natural end. There was nothing more for me I could do out of France, even in international. And I really started thinking for the first time, what's going next? I'd always taken my job via encounters, meeting the right person or the right company at the right time and following my instincts. And then I thought, well, at some point in time, I probably need to go contracting. And what will I write on my door? Very nice, international, trilingual finance professional is probably not enough. And I had done a lot of transformation in finance and through finance, but really as a dilettante. And I was fascinated with the things, all the statistics, the evergreen ones, 75% of all transformation projects fail, if it's finance or if it's business. And why is that? And it's always the human element. So I thought, well, I would like to work more deeply in transformation, but better understanding the human element. And that's when I got the idea actually to take on studies again and to understand more about this. Well, that was a bit postponed because I encountered then my next company, a mid-sized company, pharma company. So I came out of 17 years of business B2B services and moved to a pharma company. That was held by a fund. That's where I became LBO CFO. And we had really 3 fascinating years. The company doubled in size while I was there through business model change, geographical change. We changed sponsors, so we went from one fund to the next one, so a whole sale process, an onboarding process, a build-up in the UK. So it was an amazing period, and I would say I think we did 6 years of work in 3. But the idea of doing something really better understanding and studying the human behavior in change hadn't gone. What I did then, and that was in 2018, I actually left my company to do this study. So I've just finished a master in change at INSEAD, and not to name it. And that was a great journey. I'm very happy actually that I did this, although it is a part-time project, as a full-time, because I could read. I had stopped reading before for some queer reason. So I started again to read, to question, to get deeper into really people subjects. And it is a fascinating thing. And it's all about understanding yourself and where you come from. so that you then can better understand your own biases and your lenses when you look at organizations. And when you understand yourself, then you can put this away and really look at what is really happening in an organization. And that is really fascinating. And I'll start I'm now in the market again, and I'll start something probably, I think, in the next few months once this crisis is over, in order to go back as a CFO in an LBO setting. So yeah, that's about me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've done really well, Suzanne, to fit all that in the time you did, because I know from our previous conversations, you've got so many fantastic stories to share, and you've done some things that I know our audience would love to sort of try out. So that's why I'm going to sort of have to fire some questions at you about your journey, but I do want to come on with some of the work and studies you did with INSEAD as well, because I think that's where our profession is going as well, and I'd love to go through that. But in terms of your career journey, and you sort of ended up as an LBO CFO. How did that environment compare to, say, when you were doing the FP&A work, or when you were sort of working in the more established multinational type environment? You're going from that into an LBO situation, a completely different sort of B2B to B2C. I mean, how did that? Did you have to adjust yourself much? I mean, how did you successfully adapt to your new situation?
I think if you do this, first of all, you have to love business. It's a job where you have to be like a Swiss knife, because unless it's a big spin-off from a large corporation, it's often mid-sized companies that have very aggressive growth scenario, which can be aggressive that way because there is the money of the fund behind to help you succeed. I love this setting because, again, it's all about transformation. I think the times of LBOs where funds come in and strip out costs and sell bits and pieces at a higher price that they got in, that's largely over. Everything really is now about value creation. Yeah. And given the holding times, which actually have very much become a lot shorter, it's now sometimes only 2 to 3 years, which in my mind is really not enough. They used to be 4 or 5 years, which is a lot more reasonable. It allows you really to do some decent transformation first place, and then also put the basis for the following transformation, so that whoever buys it gets also a slice of the cake. Is a more normal period, but it is all about creating value, which you have also in normal quote unquote companies, but it's in a shorter time frame. So you don't have time. Generally, you have the ask is to behave like a multinational company, like a big company, with the means of a smaller one. So you have to be quite inventive, agile. You jump from one subject to the other, start in the morning on cash, and then you jump to strategic planning, and then you jump to a customer issue and to a team question. So it's really all around. But what I found really, and also after my 17 years in a corporate situation, what I found very rewarding is to sit at the table. You don't have like zillions of other corporate finance people above your head. You are reporting to your CEO and to your fund, to your shareholder, and you really matter. And you can make things move. That for me was really, I'd say, that's what I was looking for unconsciously, I think. And that was really the revelation. Obviously, it's a tough environment. It's fast-paced. You have to do everything at a time. The fund generally is quite impatient. But the role of a CFO in there is fundamental. And this is actually something I've taken as a master thesis in my studies, is to look deeper into the relationship between the fund or the shareholder, the CEO, and the CFO, which is kind of the head, a constellation for every leverage buyout. But it can also, I think it is pretty universal. It's just that in a fund setting, in an LBO setting, it's like a magnifying glass because things go so much quicker. What I found actually is that the CFO has a unique situation in there. He or she is the balancing element in this situation, because you have a power relationship that changes sides. It's the CEO who is really the powerful person before the fund gets in. Then the fund is in a majority setting, obviously, otherwise that doesn't work. And then the power is with the fund. And everybody tries to get the CFO on his side. And actually, the CFO has to be ferociously neutral and ferociously independent. And that is a difficult thing, especially if as a person, and if you don't know this, if you know this, then you can act with knowing it. But if as a person, you need to be close to somebody, if you need to be loved, and if you need to be included, and you don't know that, then actually you probably will get hurt in this situation because you are too close to either side. Yeah, and as everything is about creating trust in this situation, creating trust with a CEO that you're not Big Brother, and creating trust with a fund that you are transparent. The only way of doing this is to be neutral. And in order to be neutral, you need to understand who you are and what your natural tendency is so that you can put this aside.
That's actually, I mean, that's a very valid point, because I've, I actually, the way you described it, Susanne, I actually do miss working in private equity now. And you've taken me back on my own journey as well. But no, I've seen it play out really badly for people that were, let's say, they were with a business and they helped build it up. They'd invested blood, sweat, tears from a CFO role in there. And the fund comes in, and then they're taking everything personally because they're so wrapped up, their identity so wrapped up in their role. And I had this really uncomfortable position. I had these private equity, because I was like the head of investor relations, reporting stakeholder relations and all that. They come to me and they said, we need to get rid of the CFO. And I had the CEO come to me and said, like, what do you think? It's just like, I just felt like it was a function. What they ended up doing was actually getting rid of the CFO, who was a good guy. It just, any time the private equity firm wanted to engage and do something differently, he took it personally, when really, as you said, the role of the CFO was that balancing act, and the balance just wasn't there. And then they brought in another CFO, I mean, who was fantastic for my career. I learned so much, and forever indebted to him. But I can see the importance of that balancing act you describe. I mean, like, and also the point you mentioned about, knowing yourself better, and if you're going to be suited for these things. I mean, so you just gave some examples there of the importance of sort of knowing ourselves, so that, and not sort of taking things personally when the roles maybe not going the way we want or whatever. But sort of, is there any other things we could do to be that better balancing, play that balancing function better?
Yeah, I think it's really, there's something that resonates a lot with me, and that was said a lot during my studies. It's a very simple thing, actually. It's go on the balcony. Look at what happens to you or to the company from another place. And the image that is given is always that if you're in a ballroom or in a party room and everybody's frantically dancing and you are on the dance floor, you don't see anything. You don't know who is there. You don't really know what people are doing. And you in there feel quite alone, actually. And you can't really make sense of it. If you go then on a balcony and look on the dance floor from above, then you will see probably what people are dancing, who is dancing with whom, who is aside, and what you could do in order to feel well in this party or make somebody else feel well. And that is something, it's this changing perspective. That is really something that was a revelation to me. So, when I'm a CFO and I feel attacked by the fund saying, well, they don't have the right figures, or I don't understand what you're saying, and I want this and this detail, and I know, I don't have this detail, and I won't be able to get this in the near future because we don't have the system to do this. Actually, what I need then to do is not to be the perfect person I always want to be and have everything ready and have every question already answered in advance. And then I will feel attacked personally because I'm not perfect, and the fund has seen that. But if I am sure enough of myself, I know I can't be perfect here, and I just acknowledge this. And I explain, well, I understand what you want in this transparency. Let me tell you what we have and what is possible, and better understand why you need this so that we can find a way to do this if it's absolutely necessary, because it's going to have one person spending a week on getting the data together. But maybe the problem is not what you're saying. So let's talk together and identify the real problem so that the week spent by my analyst is a good week.
Actually, you know what? That's fantastic. What an example. No, that's a brilliant example, Suzanne. You know, when you were saying that, I just felt like you were counseling the investors. It's like, let's really understand why you need that, you know. But that is very well, because you sort of separate it, because the immediate reaction, and I know a lot of finance professionals feel this, is to try and have all the answers, try to be perfect, try to be accurate. That's where identities and roles are getting mixed in, right?
Yes.
But if you can separate that just like you did there, and then take a step back up to the balcony and say, okay, you know, what's going on here? Try understand the situation, understand why. And it could be a completely different reason.
Exactly. And this is the bad day. So with the COVID-19, obviously, and not working at this very moment, I have, fortunately enough, sometimes to look at webcasts. And I just followed one on design thinking yesterday. And it is exactly that. It is the first step in design thinking is to understand what the real problem is. Meaning there is a problem that is put on the table, but if you take it as is, and if you don't try to understand what is really behind, you may spend a lot of work not answering the right question. So, for example, somebody came to me, I need the new credit limit for this and that supplier, because they wanted to change actually the contract and that went into the limits. And they said, yeah, why is that? I don't know, they need it. Okay, let's see what is the real reason. And actually, those guys, they wanted actually to push out the contract. So they wanted to lower their contract in the next few months because they had a trouble with their year end. So they had too much revenue and they wanted to push some revenue out. And we didn't want to do this because of, our constraints. And actually understanding where they really came from, they didn't just want to change the contract. Actually, they had an issue about the year end, and understanding that their year end was at another date than ours. Actually, we were able to not only accommodate and so push out some orders. So we didn't order the product when we had thought we would. We pushed it out a bit, and then for us it was still in the same fiscal year, so it didn't really matter. They were accommodating, and then we got a price cut. We could get actually the product cheaper a little later. But that was because I'd asked, why do they want to do that? Let me understand what the real reason is. Once you have the real reason, then you can say, we can do something within the limits of legality, obviously, in my values, or we can't.
Yeah, I think that's a good habit to get into, that sort of just remembering to ask why, but maybe in a nice way, because you keep saying why like a small child all the time. You know, it's like great on people's nerves. So it's just when we're asking why, ask for it in like a nice way, like, you know, so you know, which means or what are you hoping to achieve from that? Just softening that why a bit. But it's a great question. But I feel the reason why we don't ask it enough in finance, and particularly because of our heritage in accounting, is I think because we're used to reacting. You know, I want the numbers. Can you get me this analysis? I needed it yesterday. All those sort of things. Just go make it happen. Whereas actually, how many times do we walk up the balcony to take that bigger view, or just hit the brakes a second to stop? Hang on a sec. Why do you need that? You know, and like I've had the same scenario myself play out. And it's like, if someone needs sort of something, I said, how much is that worth to you? It's like, you know, are you gonna if it worth enough for you to invest in it, or is it worth investing a week of my analyst time in this? For you, you know, and that's why it's important, and people appreciate that because, you know, I think it's just part of becoming a bit more commercial.
And also, and it's not why to say no, it's why to do the right thing. And especially if I get back to the fund scenario, you have to understand, I mean, a fund is okay, they are majority, they are the bosses, but they don't see the company every day. They think they know what they've bought, but generally they don't. And you also, the management in general, we think, they know, and we take stuff for granted. They ask for analysis, which we find not useful, but we have to understand that actually what are they? They are anxious. Yeah, exactly. Until there is enough trust built. And one of the biggest tasks of a CFO is to build this trust, build the trust with the business on one side, and build the trust with a fund on the other side, and not being torn too much to one or the other.
Yeah,
and until this trust is built, I mean, you have to explain and re-explain things over and over, and to do a lot of teaching just because they don't know. And as long as they don't know or they don't understand, they are anxious, and that's human. And again, that's where the human element comes into play.
Well, I was about to ask you actually about that one, because I know we want to talk about the dynamics of human behavior. This is where it's key. This whole trust thing, it's a very, very human quality that people look for in each other, you know. So this dynamics, I want to sort of get onto your example about the lasagna and the spaghetti. Would you mind maybe taking an audience through that?
Yeah, it's maybe to understand why suddenly I think that finance has to evolve in a way that we better embrace uncertainty. I mean, I've been brought up, and that's probably why I chose finance. It's precise, it is not ambiguous, you have figures, you can translate stuff into figures, you can measure what doesn't get measured, what isn't measured doesn't get improved, and everything is orderly. You can, with a lot of technicity and best practices, good practices, actually you resolve all your problems. Especially, I think, having been very early on ERP adoption in finance, we've kind of thought, well, everything is now in the machine, and we can do everything and anything. But actually, today's world is different. And I compare this, and this is something I stole from somebody. I don't really know where this comes from, but I've seen that in a presentation. I found this so compelling that I am using it now. We come from a lasagna plate. We come from orderly figures. We come from figures that tie into the penny. And we were trained to resolve structured, simple to complicated questions, but always with a big chunk of technicity and a lot of top-down. And that's where most finance people come from, and how they were trained and how I was trained. But actually, right now, we are in this volatile, uncertain VUCA world. Actually, we need something else. We have now rather complex issues where you can't resolve them just by best practice, because best practice just doesn't exist. So you have to probe, you have to trial and error, you have to sense stuff before you respond. And right now, for example, with the COVID-19, we're even in a chaotic situation, in an emergency situation, where actually you act first and you think afterwards, which is not something that is very common to finance people. And that's what I call the spaghetti plate. We need to be able to deal with this complex to chaotic situations by working with unstructured issues. And unstructured issues, you can't resolve them all alone. You can't resolve them with technicity. Actually, you have to pull in other people. You have to be inclusive with other functions. Maybe the solution is with somebody who's very, very junior, but who has a great idea. But if your organization doesn't allow for the junior to speak up, you'll never get that great idea. I think that is where a challenge lies today, but which is also a huge opportunity. It's not that finance people can't do this. They just need to be conscious of it, and then it's a muscle to be trained.
I couldn't agree more. The only challenge I have, probably like some of our other audiences, I actually like both lasagna and spaghetti. So
exactly. And I don't say don't eat lasagna anymore. It's just maybe from time to time do some spaghetti plates.
Yeah, I think that's the right way of looking at it, because I think that lasagna is a really good foundation. You know, it's simple to put together bit by bit. It's orderly, and from there, you know, it's sort of, we know it tastes good. But like, people are throwing more spaghetti plates at us nowadays, and that's the way the menus change, the trends change, expectation to change. You know, people want us dealing with more spaghettis. So no, it's a great analogy.
Yeah, and the spaghetti is about unconventional methods. So maybe you, in today's COVID-19 issues, well, you try out stuff you've never done, remote working maybe before, or video conferencing, or doing team sessions in a virtual room. But that's where you just launch yourself and you learn as you go. And and it is okay also, even if you are the boss, if you are the CFO, you don't know all the answers. But the important thing is to be candid about this, tell what you know, tell what you don't know, but create an environment where people who may have answers or may be able to find answers can express themselves. And that is really, I think that is a paradigm change for the old top-down finance organization.
Yeah, I completely agree. Susanne, I thought we had a great conversation so far. Just a few questions I want to fire at you quickly, as we normally do. So look, you've given us great advice, great conversation, lovely analogies and stories. I suppose in terms of yourself, what's been the best bit of advice you've ever received?
I think that is some advice I got when I was in my 30s. And actually, I had followed a boss who was to become the president of France. And he had told me, and you're going to become my CFO. I said, yes, great, super. I'm not even 40. I'll become a CFO. Let's go. I hadn't given a thought about this. But unfortunately, the incumbent CFO had no idea that he was pushed to retirement, and he, of course, didn't want to go. So I actually ended up in a very delicate situation where I was supposed to be his right arm, his deputy, and he didn't want to have a deputy. So I was kind of a nobody, and I was hampered in my career progression. I was very sad and very hurt personally. And at that time, I think that was the first time in my life I got a coach. I don't know how I got to this. Probably I talked to somebody who said me, well, take a coach. And that guy didn't have to do anything with finance. He came from sales, but he was a great coach. And the piece of advice he gave me is, Susanne, the most direct way to the top of a mountain is probably not the right one. It's very steep. It is very complicated. But if you take the serpentines and you do some left and right curves, then it's less steep. It is actually, the landscape is probably nicer. You have time to look at the landscape and you're not only trying to reach the top. And eventually you reach the top, maybe a little later, but you have done lots of stuff in between. And I found that was really revealing. And at that time, I decided to take such a serpentine. And I eventually made it to the top 10 years later. Not even 10 years. I think it was seven to 8. But I made it. And actually, I made it in a way that I had a lot of experience in between, which I wouldn't have had I come to the top too early. And I think that is something I still now, probably 20 years later, I still think of when I'm trying to be too speedy to get somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. It really resonates with someone who comes from the southwest of Ireland. It's as much as sometimes you want to get that direct route, sometimes just taking it a bit more casual is the wrong word, just being a bit more aware and appreciating the journey you're on. And it's not necessarily a straight line, linear, which is, again, comes back to lasagna.
Yeah, and it's also about the journey. If you don't appreciate your journey, you miss out on a lot of learning opportunities.
Completely agree. And I suppose for our audience, Susanne, would you have any recommended resources you could share with us or suggest to us?
This is less the technical stuff. It is really more about being yourself, being vulnerable. A book that I love is from Brené Brown, is Daring Greatly. And this is really about the courage to be vulnerable and how being vulnerable and showing who you really are actually helps you to create all the connections you need to thrive. And that is something that looks very odd in the first place, but there's also a famous TED she gave, The Power of Vulnerability, where she says you don't fight vulnerability, but you use it to be aligned with yourself. And that is something, I think, had I read this book earlier, there are probably a few things I wouldn't have done or I would have done differently. But again, it's never too late.
Never too late. Yeah.
Then I have two other TED Talks and one great talk here, which is already 15 years old, I think. It's the last one. It's called The Smell of the Place by Professor Sumanta Ghoshal in Davos. And that actually talks already 15 years ago that in order to make people thrive in situations, actually you have to put them in a context where they can. And he compared the context in companies that don't do this to downtown Calcutta with smog and hot, and you don't get out, and you're too lazy to work, versus a Fontainebleau forest. Fontainebleau is the city in France where INSEAD is located, or any forest anywhere. You get there, you feel energized, you see the spring coming, and you feel energized to do all those great projects. And he urges actually companies to create a Fontainebleau forest atmosphere in order not to be in a constrained compliance control contract, so a very pessimistic, negative environment and top-down environment, but more to be in stretch situations, have commitment, support people while they're doing things, and thus ultimately create trust. And we spoke a lot of trust in this talk, and this is really something, it's just 8 minutes, and this really resonates a lot with me, and it is kind of really evergreen, like spring is in a forest and the energy that it gives you.
Definitely. And so look, some great recommendations there, Susanne, and we'll make sure we get those links into the show notes. I suppose in terms of our audience, if they wish to continue the conversation, where's the best place to connect with you at?
I think, LinkedIn is the best. Susanne Liepmann, you don't have zillions of these names there, so you find me pretty quickly. And you can also see, because something I haven't talked about is I'm heading up as a serious networker, a large finance network that operates in France, but now also reaches out to other countries to network with other countries and with other finance communities. And that's actually how we got together, and myself. And so love also to continue connecting finance people and finance networks.
Yeah, I think that's really building our future, isn't it? Is those networks and sort of pulling what we're learning together, who's doing what well, where we could do better and grow together. I think there's so much opportunity out there. So I encourage our audience to go check that out as well. And Susanne, look, really appreciated the journey you took us on today. Would you perhaps have any other parting thoughts for our audience?
The only thing is be yourself, be clear about what your values are and who you are, and then you'll really pretty easily figure out in what kind of situations you fit and where you don't. You don't need to be a CFO just because you need to be a CFO. Some really fit in this, and some are great in being an FP&A leader or a shared service center leader, and that is great. You need to find your way to really fit with your personality, and that way also you will better be able to separate your role in the company and in the organization from who you are. And if something doesn't go like you want to, well, maybe it was not the right role, but it's not yourself who you should doubt of.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice to finish up on. So Susanne, thank you for coming on the show today, being a great guest mentor for us on Strengthen the Numbers.
Thank you very much, Andy, and I truly enjoyed it.
So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to know more about our guests today, their bio, and follow up on the resources mentioned during the show, you can find all the relevant links and more at sitnshow.com. There you'll also be able to get access to earlier shows, read the latest blogs. There's also an opportunity to subscribe to our newsletter, which will give you heads up as to when the next show is coming out, latest events, news, and anything that's going to be relevant to help you have a fun, rewarding and successful career in finance and accounting. And just before you go, we really appreciate your feedback. If there's something we can do better on the show, something that's not working, or something you'd like to see, even a guest you'd like for us to invite onto the show, someone who you think might be able to benefit you more and also the rest of our community, please let me know. You can email me. I'm at andrew@sitnshow.com, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just drop me a message so I know how you found me and we can connect. And really, it's our community that'll make the show. If we keep engaging and driving each other on, we'll keep on building our strength in the numbers. When all is said and done, if we can do the numbers better and finance better, we'll create more opportunities for ourselves, our friends, our families, our communities and our businesses. So until next time, have a good rest of the week, take care, and let's keep building our strength in the numbers.